There are words that sound harmless, polite, even words that most people hear and just accept. But if you've ever felt confused after a conversation with someone, if you've ever walked away thinking, wait, what just music happened? Then you already know what I'm talking about. You weren't imagining it. You were being managed. And the strangest part, it wasn't done through arguments or aggression. It was done through language so subtle, so socially acceptable, that questioning it makes you look like the problem. Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how certain people can make you feel guilty for expecting clarity? How they can keep you waiting, keep you guessing, and somehow you're the one who feels unreasonable for wanting a straight answer? That's not an accident. That's linguistic control. And by the end of this, you're going to recognize the exact words that signal it. And more importantly, you're going to know what to do the second you hear them. Most people think manipulation is obvious. They think it's lying, cheating, gaslighting, the big dramatic stuff. But that's not where real control happens. Real control happens in the small moments, in the words people use to frame the interaction before you even realize the game has started. Psychologists call this linguistic framing. One phrase can shift how you feel, what you expect, and how much you're willing to tolerate, all before you've consciously processed it. Music. Women understand this instinctively, not because they're calculating, but because they've been trained by culture, by social dynamics, by years of watching what works. They learn early that whoever controls the language controls the emotional temperature of the relationship. It's not what she says, it's what it makes you feel. And once you start recognizing the patterns, once you see the intention behind the words, you stop hearing what she's saying and start reading what she's signaling. Music. That's when everything changes. Now here's the part most people miss. The words I'm about to show you, they don't sound manipulative. They sound reasonable, polite, even kind. That's exactly why they work. Because the moment you react to them like they're a problem, you look controlling, you look insecure, but there's a darker truth here, and we'll get to that. Let's start with the first one, busy. On the surface, it's innocent. Everyone's busy, right? We all have responsibilities. But here's what most people don't understand. When someone keeps saying, I've just been so busy, they're not talking about their schedule. They're talking about you specifically. They're testing how much effort you'll invest with zero return. They're seeing if you'll stay patient while they stay inconsistent. Because patience in this context doesn't signal maturity. It signals submission. Think about it. She says she's busy. You wait. She replies just enough to reset your hope, then disappears again. And every time she does, your brain lights up like you just won something when music didn't. This is conditioning. Behavioral scientist B.F. Skinner proved this decades ago. Unpredictable rewards create the strongest pursuit. Music. It's why slot machines are addictive. It's why intermittent attention feels more intense than consistent care. She's not busy. She's training you to chase absence. Music. Now, here's where most men fail. They hear busy and think if I just wait long enough, she'll make time. But that's not what's happening. Music. What's actually happening is this. She's seeing if you'll tolerate being prioritized. And the longer you wait without consequence, the more you confirm that you will. So what do? You don't confront her. You don't explain. You just stop showing up. Not out of anger. Music out of clarity. Because silence creates the same tension she tried to control. And when she realizes she can't provoke a reaction from you, when she sees that you've quietly moved on, her busy narrative collapses. Suddenly, her schedule clears up because the man who doesn't compete for her time is the one she starts competing for. But here's the question you should be asking right now. Why does withdrawal work when words don't? We'll come back to that. The second word is softer, more polite, and infinitely more dangerous. Maybe. Maybe sounds like consideration, music like she's thinking it over, like there's still a chance. But here's what it actually is, a hold. When she says, maybe I'll let you know. She's not being indecisive. She's keeping you available while she checks her other options. She's seeing if you'll stay accessible without direction. If your self-respect bends when her attention disappears, you ask her out. She says, maybe. You wait. She posts a story in another man's car. Music. Now, most men interpret silence as politeness. They think waiting shows interest. They think it's the mature thing to do. But here's the truth most people won't tell you. Waiting shows weakness. Not because you're patient, but because you're letting someone else control your time with no commitment in return. You're operating in her timeline, not yours. And the moment you do that, you've already lost negotiating power. Think about this for a second. If someone actually wanted to see you, if they genuinely valued your time, would they leave you hanging? Would they say maybe and then go silent for days? No. They'd make a plan, they'd show up, or they'd be honest and say no. But maybe does something more insidious. It keeps you emotionally invested without requiring her to invest anything. It's the safest form of control because it doesn't feel like control. It feels like possibility. And that's exactly the trap. Here's the uncomfortable part. Most men stay because they think leaving makes them the bad guy. They think walking away from maybe is impatient, immature, or harsh. But let me ask you something. Who decided that tolerating disrespect is maturity? Who convinced you that protecting your time and energy is a character flaw? Because I'll tell you who benefits from that belief. The people who drain you. Here's what you do instead. Music. Treat maybe as no. Not with attitude, not with resentment, but with certainty. Because when you act like your time is limited, because it is, she's forced to treat it like it matters. You stop waiting. You stop checking in. You move forward as if the decision has already been made. And here's what happens next. She either commits or she loses you. Both outcomes return your power because the moment she realizes she can't stall you into submission, the dynamic flips. Suddenly, she's the one wondering where you went. She's the one trying to re-engage. But there's something deeper here, something most people don't realize until it's too late. And we'll get to that in a moment. The third word is the cruelest, because it sounds kind friend. When she calls you a good friend, most men think it's affection, connection, music, closeness. But it's not. It's demotion. Women categorize men the moment they meet them. Dominant, provider, placeholder, emotional outlet. Music friend means resource without reward. You become the person she calls when she needs comfort, validation, attention. But there's no reciprocity, no physical connection, no emotional investment that costs her anything. You get the labor. She gets the benefit. And it happens because you trained her to expect access without consequence. She knows you'll answer. She knows you'll listen. She knows you'll stay. And the reason she knows that is because you've never made her question it. Now, here's where most men get confused. They think if I just keep being there for her, she'll see my value, she'll realize what she has. But that's not how human psychology works. People don't value what they can access for free. They value what requires them to earn it. They value what they might lose. So the more available you are, the less valuable you become. Not because you're not a good person, but because availability without boundaries signals low self-worth, and people instinctively move away from that. Let me give you the most uncomfortable truth in this entire video. You're not in the friend zone because she doesn't see your value. You're there because she sees it perfectly, and she's decided it's more useful to her this way. She gets emotional support, attention, validation, a backup plan, all without having to give anything in return. Why would she change that? She won't, not unless you do. So, here's how you flip it. You remove access. Not to punish her, not to manipulate her, music, but to reset the dynamic. Because when she feels your absence, her body reads it as loss, and loss triggers evaluation. She either upgrades how she treats you or she disappears completely. Both are a win because the man who withdraws attention from someone who's taking advantage always comes back stronger. Music. And the woman who truly valued him will notice. The one who didn't, she'll move on and you'll know exactly where you stood. But here's the question no one asks. Why do people wait until they're drained to set boundaries? We'll come back to that. The fourth word is the quietest and maybe the most effective. Soon. Soon sounds like interest, like intention, like she's thinking about you, but it's not. It's avoidance dressed up as hope. We'll hang out soon. Music, I'll text you soon. I'll be ready soon. She's not making plans. She's pacifying you. Psychologists call this temporal delay reinforcement. It's when someone promises a future reward, so you ignore the present neglect. And most men fall for it constantly because hope feels productive. It feels like progress. But hope without proof is a trap. If a woman truly wants to see you, there is no soon. There's a music date. There's a time. There's a plan. Soon is what people say when they want to keep you attached without committing to anything real. And here's the part that stings. You already know this. Deep down. You can feel when someone's stalling. You can sense when soon is just a word they use to buy time, but you ignore it because admitting it means facing something uncomfortable. It means accepting that maybe you're not the priority you thought you were. Let me ask you something. Music. How many times have you heard soon and then waited weeks, maybe months for it to happen? How many times did you tell yourself, she's just busy, she'll reach out when she's ready? And how many times did that moment ever actually come? Here's what's really happening. Soon isn't a promise. It's a test. She's seeing if you'll accept delay without pushback, if you'll stay emotionally available while she keeps her options open. And every time you accept soon without consequence, you're training her to believe your time doesn't have value. You're teaching her that you'll wait, and people don't respect what waits for them indefinitely. So what do? You step back immediately, not with anger, not with some grand announcement. You just stop operating in her timeline. You stop asking when. You stop following up. You let soon be the last word she said, and you move on as if it already means no. Because here's the reality. Boundaries reveal truth faster than words ever can. When she realizes she can't delay you into submission, when she sees that soon didn't keep you hooked, she has two options. Step up or disappear. Either one exposes her true intentions. And once you know that, you stop being confused. Now let's pull all of this together, because here's what most men miss. Women don't reveal their intentions in long explanations. They don't sit you down and tell you where you stand. They reveal it in single words. Busy, maybe, friend, soon. These aren't casual phrases. They're indicators of leverage. Each one tells you exactly where she thinks your value stands. Each one is a signal of how much effort she believes you'll tolerate before you walk away. And the man who reacts to these words, who gets frustrated, who demands clarity, who tries to negotiate his way back into her attention, loses ground. But the man who observes, adjusts, and maintains his composure, he gains it. Because here's the truth that no one wants to say out loud. A woman doesn't respect the man who chases clarity. She respects the man who already has it. That's the shift, from emotional dependency to full control. And once you feel it, once you stop needing her validation to know your worth, you'll never fall for manipulation again. But there's something even more important here, something that goes beyond just these 4 words. The reason these patterns work isn't because women are uniquely manipulative. It's because most men are trained from a young age to be reactive, to prove themselves, to chase approval. You're taught that your value is measured by how much effort you put in, how patient you are, how understanding, how willing you are to wait for someone to choose you. And that conditioning makes you vulnerable, because the person who's willing to wait indefinitely is the person who doesn't believe they deserve better now. And other people can sense that. They can feel it in how you respond, in how quickly you accept delay, music, and how much inconsistency you tolerate before you finally speak up. They're not testing your loyalty. They're testing your self-respect. And every time you accept busy, maybe friend, or soon without consequence, you're showing them exactly how much you have. Here's the question you need to ask yourself. How long are you willing to let someone control your emotional state with words that cost them nothing? Because that's what's happening, music here. Every time you wait for soon, you're handing over your peace. Every time you accept maybe, you're giving away your time. Every time you stay in the friend zone hoping things will change, you're investing music in a future that doesn't exist. And the cruelest part, the person doing this to you isn't losing sleep over it. They're not sitting there wondering if they're being fair. They're just living their life while you're stuck in a loop of hope and disappointment. That's not connection, that's control. And the moment you see it for what it is, everything changes. So, let's talk about what happens when you finally stop playing along, when you stop accepting vague timelines, when you stop waiting for clarity that never comes, when you quietly remove yourself from situations where your value isn't recognized. Most people think this is about punishment, about making someone pay for disrespecting you, but that's not what this is. This is about recalibration. Because the moment you stop reacting to weak language, the moment you stop letting someone else's uncertainty dictate your emotional state, you shift the entire power dynamic. And here's what's fascinating. You don't have to say a word. You don't have to announce your boundaries. You don't have to explain why you're pulling back. You just stop being available in the way you used to be. You stop answering immediately. You stop initiating. You stop making yourself the emotional safety net for someone who won't commit to showing up for you. And something strange happens. The person who was too busy suddenly has time. The person who said maybe suddenly wants to make plans. The friend who only called when she needed something suddenly starts noticing your absence. Not always, but often enough that you start to see the pattern. And here's where it gets darker. The people who come back, they're not coming back because they suddenly realized your value. They're coming back because they lost control. Think about that for a second. When you were available, predictable, waiting, music, they had all the power. They could reach out when they wanted, ignore you when they wanted, keep you in rotation without ever having to commit. But the moment you stop playing that role, they lose leverage. And for some people, that's unbearable, not because they care about you, but because they care about maintaining the dynamic that benefits them. So they reach out, they're music warmer, more available. They suddenly want to see you. And if you're not careful, you'll think, see, she did care. I just had to be patient. But that's not what happened. What happened is that you became unavailable, and unavailability triggered scarcity. And scarcity triggered pursuit. She's not chasing you. She's chasing the control she just lost. Now, let me give you the most uncomfortable truth in this entire video. Some of you are going to hear all of this and still go back. You're going to recognize the patterns. You're going to see the manipulation. You're going to know that soon means nothing and maybe is a stall tactic. And you're still going to wait. Why? Because walking away feels harder than staying, because uncertainty feels safer than closure, because part of you still believes that if you just hold on a little longer, things will change. But here's what you need to understand. The version of this person you're waiting for doesn't exist. You're not waiting for her to realize your value. You're waiting for her to become someone she's never been, someone who prioritizes you, someone who shows up consistently, someone who doesn't need you to be invisible for weeks before she remembers you exist. And I need you to hear this clearly. That person isn't coming. The woman who wanted you wouldn't need to be convinced. She wouldn't leave you guessing. She wouldn't use words like music, busy, maybe, friend, and soon to keep you at a distance while maintaining access. She'd just show up. And the fact that she isn't should tell you everything you need to know. Let me ask you something else. What are you actually afraid of? Because if you strip away all the justifications, if you remove all the hopeful narratives you've built in your head, what's really stopping you from walking away? Is it the fear that you'll never find someone better? Is it the fear that leaving proves you weren't enough? Is it the fear that if you stop waiting, you'll have to admit you wasted time on someone who was never going to choose you? Because here's the truth. Those fears are louder than the disrespect. Music. They're louder than the inconsistency. They're louder than every single red flag you've been ignoring. And as long as those fears control you, you'll keep accepting treatment you know you don't deserve. You'll keep telling yourself it's patience when it's really self-abandonment. You'll keep calling it love when it's really just familiarity. And you'll keep waiting for someone to see your value while refusing to see it yourself. So here's what power actually looks like. It's not in what you say back. It's not in how clever your response is. It's not in playing games or trying to make her jealous or proving that you don't need her. Power is in what you no longer feel you have to respond to. It's in hearing, "I've been so busy," and feeling nothing. Not anger, not hurt, just clarity. It's in hearing, maybe, and moving forward like the answer was already no. It's in being called a friend and knowing that's not the role you want, so you stop playing it. It's in hearing soon and understanding that if it mattered, it would have already happened. Because when you stop reacting to weak language, you start controlling the interaction. Not through force, not through manipulation, but through self-respect. And the moment you do that, the moment you stop waiting for someone else to validate your worth, everything shifts. The people who were stringing you along either step up or fade out. And either way, you win because you're no longer operating from a place of scarcity. You're no longer basing your value on whether someone else recognizes it. You just know. And that's the shift most men never make. Here's what I want you to understand. The men who fall for these patterns aren't weak. They're not stupid. They're not broken. They're just conditioned. Music. Conditioned to believe that effort equals love, that patience equals maturity. Music, that waiting means you care. But none of that is true. Effort without reciprocity is depletion. Patience without respect is submission. And waiting for someone who won't commit is just emotional self-harm with better branding. You don't need to keep proving yourself to people who've already decided you're optional. You don't need to keep explaining your worth to people who refuse to see it. You don't need to keep accepting breadcrumbs and calling it connection. You need to walk away, not loudly, not dramatically. Music just quietly, with dignity, with a kind of certainty that doesn't need to announce itself. Because the people who deserve you will never make you feel like you have to earn their attention. They'll just give it. Now let's talk about what happens after you walk away, because this is where most people stumble. They finally build up the courage to step back. They stop waiting. They stop accepting vague answers. They remove themselves from the dynamic that was draining them. And then nothing happens. She doesn't reach out. She doesn't notice. She doesn't come running back the way you secretly hoped she would. And that silence, that complete absence of reaction feels like confirmation of your worst fear. Maybe I really wasn't worth choosing, but here's what you're missing. Her silence isn't proof that you weren't valuable. It's proof that she never intended to treat you like you were. And there's a massive difference between those two things, because value isn't determined by whether one person recognizes it. Value is inherent. It exists whether someone sees it or not. The woman who didn't choose you didn't make you less valuable. She just revealed that she was never going to be the person who honored that value, and walking away from that from someone who was never going to show up the way you needed isn't a loss, it's protection. But here's the part that most people never talk about. The reason these 4 words work so effectively isn't just because of what they mean, it's because of what they prevent. Busy prevents commitment. Music maybe prevents clarity. Friend prevents intimacy. Soon prevents accountability. Each word creates just enough ambiguity that you can't confront it without looking insecure. Just enough plausible deniability that calling it out makes you seem like the problem. And that's the brilliance of it. She's not lying. She's not making promises. She's breaking. She's just staying vague, staying non-committal, staying in control of the narrative while you're left trying to read between the lines. And the longer you stay in that space, the space where you're waiting for clarity that never comes, the more you internalize the idea that you're the one who's asking for too much. You start believing that wanting consistency is needy, that expecting follow-through is unrealistic, that needing someone to show up the way they said they would is somehow demanding. And that's how manipulation works. Not by convincing you that you're worthless, but by convincing you that your standards are the problem. Music. Let me ask you one more question. How many times have you lowered your expectations to make room for someone who wasn't raising their effort? How many times have you told yourself, maybe I'm being too harsh, maybe I'm expecting too much, maybe if I just give it more time, things will get better? And how many times did things actually get better? Because here's the truth that no one wants to say. Music. People don't change because you wait for them. They change because something forces them to. And if your absence doesn't force change, then your presence never mattered the way you thought it did. That's the hard pill to swallow. The person you've been bending over backward for, the person you've been patient with, understanding with, available for, didn't need more time to see your value. They just didn't see it as valuable. And no amount of waiting changes that. So what does it actually look like to move past this? It's not about becoming cold. It's not about shutting people out or refusing to be vulnerable ever again. It's about developing the ability to recognize intention early. It's about trusting patterns over words. It's about understanding that when someone truly wants you in their life, they don't leave you guessing. They don't keep you on hold. They don't use vague language to maintain access while avoiding commitment. They just show up. And when you've experienced that, when you've been around people who actually prioritize you without needing to be convinced, you stop tolerating anything less. Not because you're bitter, not because you've been hurt, but because you finally understand what respect actually looks like. And once you know that, busy stops feeling like an explanation. It feels like an excuse, maybe stops feeling like consideration. It feels like avoidance. Music, friend, stops feeling like connection. It feels like demotion. Soon stops feeling like a promise. It feels like a delay tactic. And the moment you see these words for what they are, you stop being confused. You stop wondering if you're overthinking. You stop questioning whether you're being too sensitive. You just know and you act accordingly. Here's what I want you to take from this. You're not the person who waits anymore. You're not the person who accepts vague timelines and calls it patience. You're not the person who tolerates being someone's backup plan while convincing yourself it's connection. You're the person who recognizes games before they're fully played. You're the person who values your time too much to let someone waste it with empty words. You're the person who walks away from situations that require you to shrink, to music beg, to prove your worth to people who've already decided you're optional. And that's not arrogance, music, that's clarity. Because the people who are meant to be in your life won't make you feel like you have to fight for a place in it. They'll just make space for you willingly, consistently, without you having to ask. And everyone else, let them stay in the past where they belong. Power isn't in what you say back. It's in what you no longer feel the need to respond to. It's in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your worth doesn't depend on whether someone else sees it. It's in walking away from people who drain you and never looking back to see if they noticed because they either did and didn't care or they didn't. And that tells you everything. Either way, you're free. And that freedom, that ability to move through the world without needing validation from people who are never going to give it, is the most powerful thing you can build. So stop waiting for people to choose you. Choose yourself and watch how quickly everything else falls into place.